We're glad you're here. My name is Eric White. I'm the Adult Services Librarian here at the library. We are excited to have Michael Clifton here this evening to talk about his experiences in incarceration and all the great work and what he's been up to since. So I will, sorry, I got a little off in my script here. I'll introduce him in here in just a second. But first, I wanted to say a couple words about One Book, One Valley. Every year, the Estes Valley comes together to celebrate community and literacy with One Book, One Valley, where the community selects a book to all read together. And then in the month of January, we come together with programming and discussions around that book. This year's book is The Stranger in the Woods, The Extraordinary Tale of the Last True Hermit by Michael Finkel. As folks who have read the book know, one of the major themes of the book is solitude, and this program is part of an exploration of that theme from different angles. I also want to give our standard disclaimer. The library considers part of its mission to bring in speakers to share their perspectives for the enrichment of the community. Speakers' perspectives are entirely their own. We don't tell them what to say, and we don't think you'd want us to. All right. Now I would like to introduce Michael Clifton. After receiving a 98-year sentence at the age of 19, Michael Clifton endured almost 25 years of incarceration before eventually having his sentence commuted by Governor Jared Polis in 2023. During the latter years of his incarceration, Michael began to utilize his experience and the lessons he learned to develop programs specifically geared toward mentoring and supporting justice-impacted populations. He also found his passion in performance art, serving as the associate producer for the podcast Within through the University of Denver's Prison Arts Initiative, as well as stage manager for several theatrical productions. As program facilitator at Remerg, Michael is excited to be able to use his expertise to deliver programs to support individuals returning to society. He is also passionate about advancing equity and advocating for those seeking justice. Please welcome Michael Clifton.
Hello, everybody. How you doing? Good.
All right. Well, maybe let's just get started with maybe just tell us a little bit about you. Who's Michael Clifton?
Today, I'm a hardworking man. Work a couple jobs. I'm enjoying family life. I got a couple of kids, couple of grandkids. And I'm just enjoying the simple things in life. Things that we take for granted sometimes. And just working hard to try to stay involved in the community. With my work I do is reentry, trying to help break down the barriers for people kind of returning from prison or jail, and just trying to help them with their transition and so that they can be productive citizens and lead a healthy life. Yes.
Cool. All right, so I'm going to take us back just a little bit to kind of go back earlier in your story, if that's okay. Sort of back to the late 90s. Can you tell us a little bit about your early life? Like who were you back then?
So I was a young, energetic kid with a lot of dreams and ambition. Um, but I was also impatient, I grew up in, middle class family, both parents and but at some point around like, yeah, I would say like high school, I started to kind of take a turn for like the worst, making kind of like bad decisions, kind of rebelling against like the lessons that my parents tried to instill in me. And, just trying to experience life. But, sometimes, you're told what to watch out for. You're told to be careful of these certain things. But what I've kind of learned is that sometimes you have to go through those things to really kind of learn and kind of set out who you are, who you're going to be in life. So, um, so I started getting in trouble kind of with the law with smaller things like shoplifting, auto thefts. But like a lot of the crimes I did back then, my mindset was, these are crimes that where I'm not hurting anybody, I'm not committing crimes against somebody. And like I said, I was kind of impatient. I wanted things. I wanted things. So I just didn't have a plan or didn't know how to get there. So maybe I was missing that mentorship as far as how to live a good life and achieve the things you want um, by coming up with a plan and then seeing that plan through. So I found myself kind of taking a turn for the worse. But what I will kind of comment about that is the mindset that I had at that time was the mindset of a lot of young African American kids that is today and even back then is when you think about like it's in like I guess like affluent families are kind of like normal or well off to do families. Like the path for a kid to college is kind of just ingrained into that's like the normal path, right? You go to high school and then you go to college. And so for kind of like young black men, you kind of grow up with the mindset that you know, part of your path in life is going to be going to prison or going to jail. And so you kind of accept that as like just part of your path that you got to walk. So that was kind of my mindset. Like I knew that I was gonna either go to jail or prison because I also knew that I was doing things that I wasn't supposed to be doing, and there was a risk that I might get caught. But my mindset was that I wasn't doing things, and I didn't want to do things that would place me in prison for life. So because of that, I never used to carry a gun. I never wanted to kill anybody. I just the thing I feared the most was going to prison for life. So
So maybe tell us about the decision and the aftermath that led to your incarceration.
yeah, so at age 19, I'm living the life that I'm living. I'm trying to live. I mean, I'm trying to live the family life to a degree. I have my son at the time. Um, I was with him and his mom. But I was also, then I was working a couple of jobs. But I was also still like living, the life rolling with my friends, with my homies, and still kind of, committing crimes, burglaries, um, and what we call the player life, just where you just kind of, you want a lot of girls and you want the fancy things and stuff like that. And so, um, for the case that I eventually ended up going to prison for, um, I had committed two aggravated robberies along with my co-defendant. One was at a Blockbuster in the morning where there was one person, and the other one was at a Hollywood video store where that one had two people at night. And so we weren't arrested or caught at the scene, but a couple of days later, we were arrested. And from those two robberies, we were actually charged with three aggravated robberies, three kidnappings, two burglaries, and the crime of violence, which the crime of violence is a charge that carries a mandatory consecutive sentencing. So that if you're found guilty of those charges, it takes the discretion away from the judge, and he has no choice but to sentence you to consecutive sentencing. And so, as I was going through the process, the court process, the plea bargain, the one and only plea bargain that was offered to us was 75 years. And, at the time, we're like, whoa, like, we knew we did something wrong, but nobody was even physically hurt here, right? Like nobody was shot, nobody was touched. And so that part was crazy. But my mindset was like, life expectancy is 75 years, and depending on, right, like depending on your demographic and your socioeconomic status, I mean, this could be less. So I was, yeah, I was 19 at the time. So it's like, that's not a plea bargain. I ended up going to trial. My co-defendant, he ended up going to trial, and we ended up both getting found guilty for the charges. But yeah, that's how I ended up catching the case, receiving the sentence, being arrested and receiving the 98-year sentence.
And how were like at that time, do you remember how you were feeling? Were you just in shock? Were you angry? Were you feeling like that's what happens? Like how were you feeling at the time?
Yeah, I definitely was shocked and angry. Um, I was in disbelief, really, like how could this happen? Like, um, um, so that was basically like the whole process. The crazy thing about it is 98 years was the minimum time that we were facing. That was the minimum. The maximum time that we were facing was like 364 years. So the whole time that I'm, going through the process and going through trial, the number 98 is out there. Um, so when I and my co-defendant, when we were sentenced, it still hit me like a brick, right? Like it just, as far as like your outlook on life and all the dreams you had, and yeah, it was very tough. And I kind of like was kind of like hopeless, and just kind of like for a loss for words, because like for me it's like I just couldn't believe it. Like, how did this happen? Like the thing that I feared the worst, and that I told myself I never wanted it to happen to me, like it happened.
Yeah, that's gotta be devastating.
Yeah.
And so you were sent, I think you were sentenced in 2000 and sent to prison. What what was that like going in there? Um, what was that environment like? Yeah, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So when you're sentenced to a sentence like that, you have an automatic appeal. And you're hopeful for that, but the hope is I mean, you're hoping on it, but that hope is like slim, because the percentage of individuals that get their cases overturned, the numbers are very slim. And so I went to prison with that little bit of hope on that, but also I had the hope and the belief that like my case was so outrageous and unjust that at some point, I didn't know when, the people with the power to be would right what I seen as a wrong. Um, but that also, it played against me as well, because like when I went to prison, with a 98-year sentence, the point system that they used to do is, they assess you from your charges, from your age, your drug use, they have all these things that they assess you, that they give you points for, and determine your custody level, right? So close, I think at the time was like 32 points. But the thing about your sentence is, the way they would do it is they would take your sentence as part of this assessment and cut that in half, and that number goes on top of those other numbers. So with a 98-year sentence, I already have 49 points off the top just for my sentence. It had nothing to do with my behavior in prison. It had nothing to do with um, drug use, gangs. It had nothing to do with that. It was simply the extent of my sentence that caused me to be sent to closed custody, which was Lyman Correctional Facility. And just speaking frankly, one of the toughest prisons at the time. And so, I kind of came into that kind of, you always have kind of worries about, what you hear about prison, what it is, and how you're going to navigate that. And so the mindset is, you don't want to get in trouble. You want to hope on appeals. You want to get that stuff overturned. Um, and then, but then reality kind of sets in. I went to prison. I didn't get involved. I tried to get involved into the law library system and studying my case, but I wasn't, grasping or comprehending like the legal system and the way those things worked out the gate. And so I more so relied on my appeals attorney to kind of, look at my case and make some arguments on the issues and try to get it overturned. And then I found myself getting involved into the the prison environment, and which was very negative. Gangs, you know, gambling, drugs. I found myself like getting involved in all those things. Not because that was what I set out intending to do. It kind of just happened. I had made a couple bad decisions to put myself in between like a rock and a hard place, and and then so I had to make a tougher decision. And so yeah, so when I first got to prison, it was very, like I say, harsh, just hostile, and I had to try to kind of learn how to like I say how to navigate it. And I didn't do a good job out the gate. I found myself, I got in a lot of trouble. Um, so I was incarcerated for almost 25 years. And, I got about, I think, 21 write ups, infractions during that time. Most of them were minor. As I got more involved in the gangs, I had got involved in a couple more serious incidents. But yeah, it was definitely a shock. And I was definitely, hopeless, really. uh, my future would look real bleak at the time, as far as, I was looking at dying in prison, and which is, just the thought of it is, you know, it can be devastating. Yeah.
So maybe you had a little bit of a feeling like you didn't have much to lose.
Yeah. I mean, when you talk about infractions and write ups and things, that was the mindset, is like these things really don't matter. I got a 98-year sentence, and I got a correctional officer talking to me about tucking in my shirt or talking back to him, and he's gonna write me up for those things. And I'm like, oh, okay, all right, like it really, that stuff really doesn't matter. And then, like you say, you're angry. I was there's no doubt I was angry because I felt that I was done wrong by the system. Either way you cut it, I knew I had done something wrong, and I'm a rational thinking person. I knew I needed to be held accountable, but it was the case and the sentence and the assessment, it was definitely harsh and unjust.
And so when we're talking about the sentencing, maybe we should take a second to explain your co-defendant's path, which was which was quite a bit different. Could you talk a little bit about what was going on with him in those 10 years since you were sentenced?
Yes, and I mean, so it's a long story, but I'll try to keep it a little short. But all credit to the clerical error that happened in his case is the reason why I'm here today. Um, so we had two cases. Both of them were dealing with aggravated robberies. The second case, they ended up dismissing the aggravated robberies for me because I was at work during those robberies. So they, that cleared me of the aggravated robberies. which clears me up, the aggravated robbery, the kidnapping, and the burglary. So in the second case, I only ended up having death by receiving. And so as we going through the process with the 75-year plea deal and going to trial, after we're found guilty and sentenced, the district attorney comes over and hands us a folder and says, I'll give you guys um, a 5-year concurrent sentence on the second case. And I'm obviously angry at the time. You didn't want to give me a reasonable plea bargain on the first case, and I'm only facing a maximum of 12 years on the second case. So I'm like, F you, take me to trial on that too. And so being that my co-defendant was facing 100 some years on the second case, he hurried up and took the 5-year concurrent deal. So when he did that, he had to stand up and get resentenced. And so when he stood up and got resentenced, it was supposed to be 5 years concurrent to the 98. Because the sentences were so similar, I still don't know to this day how the clerical error officially happened, but they ended up running all of his charges concurrent. So instead of a 98-year sentence, he ended up with a 16-year sentence. And so we did not notice at the time, right? So we both at that time thought we had 98 years. We both were sent to DRDC, Denver Diagnostic Reception Center, um, and we actually went to the case manager's office at the same time. So he went in first, and when he came out, he brought out his minimus. Your minimus is something that tells you what your charges are, and it tells you how those charges are going to be ran, consecutive or concurrent, and it tells you your total sentence, and it tells you your PED date, your parole eligibility date. So when he came out, he was like, "Yo, homie, now mind you, my co-defendant, this is somebody that we call each other brothers. We're not blood brothers from the same mom, but we were so close, we call each other brothers." So he came out and he told me, he said, "Hey man, I only got 16 years." And I was like, "What?" And he was like, "Yeah." He was like, my PED date is 2008. And so I'm like, "All right, cool." I said, "Maybe mine's is the same, right?" So I go into the case manager's office, and my sentence is a 98-year sentence. It's not a clerical error. And my PED date is 2048. And so I come out and I tell him, I was like, "Nah, mine's is what it's supposed to be." And I told him, I said, "Look, I'm not gonna say nothing. I won't bring it up until you get out and get off parole. And then if I don't win in appeals or anything like that, then I'll try to use it in a legal argument." And he told me at that time that he was going to change his life, give his life to God, which is something that, I mean, any person would do when you just had this like miracle. Your sentence goes from like 98 to 16, right? So as the time went on, I didn't know what was going to happen with that. I thought they might catch it before he was released, or I just didn't know. But so he went to a private facility. Like I say, his parole eligibility date was 2008. And the way the correctional system works, which is understandable to a degree, is the resources and the classes and the things that they provide go to the individual with shorter sentences, right? And so where he went, he had better opportunities to basically rehabilitate. And it wasn't a closed facility; it was a medium facility. And so he took advantage of all those opportunities to turn his life around, and he was actually paroled in 2008. And I'm knowing that all this stuff is going on, and I'm happy for him because like this is supposed to be my brother, right? So you're always happy for somebody that you care about that something good happens to him. But during that time, our relationship had kind of like died off. The communication between us kind of died off, and we actually got back in touch right before he got out. And then when he got out, we lost touch again. Like he moved on with his life, and I just accepted that for what it was. Like that's kind of life. Sometimes you have relationships, and then you guys go separate ways. I always felt like I knew that there was an opportunity, a possibility for me to utilize the clerical error in his case as a legal argument for me in my case. And eventually, I know we'll kind of talk about it a little bit, but that's what led to 20 some years later bringing my case back to the spotlight was when um, his case got back brought to the spotlight. So
And I should say, you know, as far as your co-defendant's story goes, like he's probably the best person to tell his own story, but it's hard to, because your stories are so interwoven, it's hard to, you know, tell your story completely without his story.
yeah, I think you have to talk about his case and his story, which then affected my case and my story. Because the truth of the matter is, like, I wouldn't be here if the things didn't happen for him. There's a lot of individuals who have excessive sentences, who are, doing the right thing, taking steps to change their life and trying to, bring attention to their case or their situation. And because they didn't have the, crazy or circumstance or situation that happened between with my case and my co-defendant's case, they don't have the notoriety or the recognition or the spotlight on them and their case. And just the truth of the matter is, there's a lot of those individuals who didn't take the same path that I took, right? Like, like I mentioned, I went to prison and got in a lot of trouble. Um, in my earlier years. And so, I know guys is doing like 100 and some years for crimes similar to me. Uh, and they've been role model prisoners, and they're still sitting in prison to this day. So
So circling back a little bit to kind of relationships and folks you knew there, can you talk a little bit about, like, at that time in prison, like, who was your community?
um so coming to prison, I wasn't a gang member. I had friends that was involved in the gang life and stuff like that, um but coming to prison and kind to wanting to fit in, but also just when you're in that environment, it's this confined environment, and it's a smaller, like, it's different than like being in the free world. You can move and kind of choose more so who you want to be around. I started to, hang out with guys and friends of mine who were gang members. And then once you start hanging out with those individuals, you become an affiliate. And then the more you're affiliated, the more it's like, okay, you're rolling with them. If you get in this situation, they got your back. If they get in this situation, you're expected, you should have their back. You know what I mean? And so next thing you know, I'm rolling, with with the gang. I'm affiliated with the gang. And I mean, listen, there's when you think about the prison environment, there's a lot of positives that could come from that. Being affiliated or a gang member. They're the ones that usually has the access to all the things that you might want to have access to. They have the ability to make connections more, you know, with other individuals on the inside or outside. So, like, it depends on how you look at it, but it can have positives, but it also comes with the negative stuff too. So gang conflict, um, you know, um, the drug involvement, but don't like, I wasn't like this big gang member or this drug dealer or nothing like that. Don't get me wrong, but those things are involved when you're talking about being associated or affiliated with a gang. And it's not something that like I wanted to be a part of, wanted to like was looking to become a part of, but it happened. And so, that was how I kind of like fit in and start doing my time as far as working out, who I, break bread with, was just eating and, kind of just doing my time with, was a gang that I was affiliated with. And like I say, I tried initially to get involved in like the law library, kind of studying and stuff like that. But but drifted away from that and just got involved into prison nonsense, and the programming was really, like I say, it was more so for the individuals who were short timing. So like, even though I did want to do something with my life, so to an extent, like take advantage of the things that they had, I just couldn't be a part of it because I had too much time. It's the computer classes, uh, and things like that. I just had too much time. So that also played a part. I think in the decisions and the path that I took.
So you just weren't eligible to enroll in those things because of the sentence.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Hmm.
So you talked a little bit about, getting in some trouble, um, talked a little bit about gangs. At some point you were sent to um administrative segregation or solitary confinement. Can you talk about how that came about, how you ended up there?
Yes. So I did. I had made some bad decisions that kind of put me in a tough spot. And I got involved into an altercation with another individual. That altercation was basically a fight. Not trying to minimize it. And I had a what they call a shank, and I end up basically stabbing that other individual. Um, and so I was sent to the hole for that, and charged with attempted murder. And then so I ended up doing, like, I think it's 90 days or 120 days in the hole. And then after that, I was sent to solitary confinement, CSP, Colorado State Penitentiary. Um, and for me, you don't want to go to prison forever, but then when you talk about not even being able to be like a part of the population, and interact with other individuals and being isolated in a cell, confined to that cell 23 hours a day. It was very, so I think that was when I first started having kind of like panic attacks. Um, and they felt called claustrophobic. And so I guess I kind of panicked at first because just the thought of being in that state for like so long, which at the time was, I'm doing like at least 3 months, which seemed forever. Um, so that was very like stressful. But how I dealt with it originally was, first you trying to do whatever you can do. You try to read a little bit, start doing some reading, maybe a little writing, and then also a lot of kind of sleeping, but also like daydreaming. You kind of like reminisce about how your life when you were free, and some of the good times, but also about what life like might be like, if you're ever free again, and what you would do. And so that was how I kind of coped with it at first, with the whole time. And the difference between the whole, so after the I think 90 or 120 days was up, I was sentenced to a solitary confinement. And so the difference with that is, like, when you move to that stage, after, I think 7 days, you can get a radio. After I think like 60 days or 30 days, you can get a TV. And so those are things that can, help you pass the time, help you cope with the isolation and the loneliness, because it's like a connection back to the world. And the communication, the phone calls are very limited at that time. You can go from using the phone multiple times, excuse me, multiple times a day to using the phone once a month. So the communication with your family is cut short at that point. And then, like I say, you can write letters and stuff like that. So I really got into like writing letters. Um, But like I said, when you move to solitary confinement, it did kind of help when I was able to start like having a radio and a TV. And the thing about solitary confinement, I know you got more questions about it, but at first when I went to solitary confinement, I just kind of I didn't do much. I didn't have a routine. I never. It's a strange feeling because you don't know when you're gonna get out. Like some guys, 2 years, some guys 10 years, some guys 15 years. You don't know when you're gonna get out of solitary confinement. So that you're kind of contemplating and thinking about that too. So it was about like 6 months until I actually like I guess kind of snapped out of that like depression, that kind of like loneliness, and started to come up with a routine. And I think that was what really helped me through that time in solitary confinement was just coming up with a consistent routine, working out, reading, writing my shows, definitely. But yeah, it was really important for me to have a routine and stick with it. So
Was there was there ever a balance between like activity, like working out, watching TV, reading, and like did you ever choose to be just alone with your thoughts at that point, or did you was it better just to have things to do?
it's a little bit of both. So the routine is like it's very like rigorous where you come up with from sun up to sundown you kind of have an ideal of what you're gonna do because it's basically the routine every day is pretty much the same, um, and so definitely I definitely came up with a part of that, but yeah, I'm sorry, I I lost the second part of the question. What was
Oh, it was more just like about the balance of activity and just like being alone with your thoughts and
Y-
thinking.
Yeah, so you have that, you have moments, you have a lot of that where you're alone with yourself and you're thinking about who you are, the stuff you've done, who you want to be, kind of trying to learn yourself. But it's this is the thing about like solitary confinement is like you can read and kind of like study and kind of like learn and get to know yourself. Um, but what I found out when I got out as well is like that learning yourself in that isolation is different than when you are actually in society or in population and you're interacting with other people. You can try to learn yourself and try to prepare yourself and try to discipline yourself for scenarios or situations or who you want to be. But when the unexpected variables come into play, um, and you know you might you might revert back to your old self, or you just might respond differently than you might have been planning or you thought you might have. So yeah, I had a lot of time, a lot of thoughts with myself, but also the way solitary confinement in Colorado was, you were isolated to yourself 23 hours a day, but you can still kind of talk to like your neighbors. Um, through the doors. And we had this method called fishing, um, where you like make a fishing line out of your boxing line, and you kind of like can shoot a line to your neighbors or to the next doors or through the toilet. Um, yeah, I mean, you got to get very creative. You got to get very creative, and guys definitely do. But yeah, so we were able to communicate to a degree, you know, with other individuals who were also in solitary confinement in the pods or in other pods at the time, which was really helpful. Um, and also, they have an element of programming to a degree where they like anger management, life skill choices, where they might have a teacher that might come around and bring you a book, and you're supposed to do those activities from that book. Um, but yeah,
So it sounds like there's more opportunities for um, communication and interaction than one might think when one first thinks of solitary confinement, but it still sounds really hard.
Yeah, and it really more, I guess, so depends on the person, but also depends on the environment of the pod that you go to because it's like it's random, right? Like you might go to a pod that the environment is very like hostile. It's on racial lines, on gang lines, um, and there's a lot of conflict. There's a lot of beef, and individuals are what they call cell banging, arguing with each other, knocking on the doors, knocking on the tables. Constant loudness. So you might go to a pod and it might be that. So you might have to learn how to cope with that, which I really did because my pod was a little bit of that, even though individuals reached out to me when I got into the pod, but I had a neighbor that was very loud and vocal, and he used to love to wake the whole pod up at 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, throwing around his box. They used to give us a plastic box, and he would throw it around 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, waking everybody up. He was right next door to me, so I pretty much had to get used to that loud banging, that loud noise, and kind of just kind of maintain my thoughts or what it is I would want to be doing, or even like if I wanted to go to sleep, I would put in earplugs, but find a way to still go to sleep through the noise or through the banging and stuff like that. So and then you might go to a pod where it's a little calmer and nobody's arguing at the moment. But like I said, it just depends on how long you stay there because it also depends on who comes in and who goes out, and so it changes. It changes with time.
So it sounds like you learned how to tune out a lot of stuff as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think for those people that maintain their sanity, you have to be able to, or you can find yourself, losing your sanity and maybe becoming somebody that you're not familiar with, or even like you're just not wanting to be, but you kind of succumb to the environment and the chaos, and then you start to behave and do the same things, whether it's out of retaliation or whether it's just to go along with it. So yeah, you have to be able to definitely like have that strong mindset and resilience to be able to tune out and kind of like stay connected to, I feel like, who you are, your true self.
So you had to maybe dig down and find that and stay connected to that.
Yeah. It was like you say, it was definitely challenging. And I have moments of, deep depression, despair, and uh don't necessarily like to talk about it, but y- suicidal thoughts, you know. Yeah, that's just, I think, a reality of that, being in that state, especially when it's a different, like in the book when you in the free world, when you that's a choice that you make for yourself to be in solitude. But like when you're in that situation, like I made a decision to place myself into it, but it wasn't something that I wanted to be in. That's something that I woke up and said, yes, I want to be alone. I want to be in isolation. So that is it's that different element. And so it's a different type of um, isolation. But then, like I say, if you kind of like are like strong minded and you kind of stay grounded, you can like I say, stay connected to yourself, but find reason, find like reason to keep going.
Do you mind if I ask what was that reason for you?
Uh, Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I mean, my reason was my mom, um, and I mean all of my family, but I just, I know it would probably be hardest on her, like if I didn't make it out of not just solitary confinement, but prison. Um, but like, not even at that time, but like years later, when I got involved with performance arts, I actually wrote a play. Um, I actually wrote a play called Liberty by Any Means. And so basically the play, it's a window basically of the solitary confinement. And and the character in the play is he's fighting and he has his appeal. His appeal is coming up and he's waiting for his answer with his appeal. But his sins and his story, his case is unjust. So he's hoping that the courts will do the right thing. Um, but he's also at this point in his life where he's like, he's kind of like fed up. He's tired of religion. He's tired of God. And so like he gets into like this argument with God. And then he's like, uh, he basically is like, cursing God out, like F you, I'm done with you, this and this and that. And he makes a decision, which is kind of, it depends on how you look at it. But liberty by any means, like he was going to get freedom one way or the other, right? So when the decision came back from the court, the court ruled against him, and so um, he decided to free himself by committing suicide. So yeah,
That's heavy just to sit with. Yeah. And that was something that you wrote that came from your experience.
yeah, because
at
I
that
had
time.
that, like I say, I'm a strong-willed person, but that thought did cross my mind at one point, to be like, you don't want to live like that. Um, so it did cross my mind, but it was also for me when you think about it's like agency, taking your own um life into your own hands as far as like how you want to live or what existence you're willing to live in, right? Um, and so for that moment, that character in that story, um, he made up his mind that he was going to have freedom, just not in the sense of the freedom that we might think about it, um, but he was freeing himself.
Taking some control back.
Mm,
We're glad you made it through.
thank you. I'm definitely glad too.
And so 90 days somehow turned into 5 years. How did you get out?
So I think I think it's every year or every couple of years they have like a committee that kind of reviews your case, why you came to solitary confinement, um, but also like what you if you've been in write-ups and what you've been doing while you're in solitary confinement. And so the interesting thing about my case is um, I wasn't getting into a lot of trouble in solitary confinement. You can't get into a lot of you can't get into too much trouble, right? Like I mean, I might have one write-up, but So I was there for 5 years. Not much trouble. So I was reviewed by the committee, the original board, and they shot me down. Right? They was like, no. And so it just so happened to be that at the time they switched the wardens, and I don't remember her name, but it was a female warden that came, and I don't know how long she was there for. She might have been there for like maybe 2 months, and she was like she wanted to review all the cases of the individuals that have been denied, um, and so she looked at mine and she approved me to go back to population, which is yeah.
And so, you talked earlier a little bit about, getting to know yourself in solitude versus with people. So what was it like coming out of coming out of there and being
Um,
back with people again?
yeah, it was really good. Uh, just to be social again, being active. My natural being and personality is extrovert. Um, Coming to prison, I started to be kind of introvert to a degree, um, and I felt like I was coping with it well in solitary confinement. Because I had just got like, so I feel like us as humans, we're placed in situations, and a lot of times we feel like some stuff we can't deal with. But when you're forced in that situation, most of us will find a way to fight through it and overcome it, or work our way through it. And um, so I had, like I said, I felt like I was coping with accent very well, with my routine and stuff like that. But then I came out and I was enjoying the time where I was able to, act, play cards, go to the yard, hang out, walk the yard, work out. I was enjoying all that, and missed it so much. Oh God, it's like you don't realize how important um, social connection and human connection is until you're deprived of it. And so yeah, I was doing that. But what I didn't realize was that I used to love to play cards before I went to solitary confinement. But I did it as a hobby. And then when I got out, like I didn't realize it right away, but like within like 5 to 6 months, I realized that I had a habit, a bad habit, and a problem. Like I love playing poker. I still love it to this day, don't get me wrong. But I love playing poker like sun up to sundown. And that was what I love to do like all the time. And that was like all I thought about. And and I don't know how, so I don't know what that solitary confinement did to that, to where that was what my habit and my behavior and my um what kind of what I love doing. But it happened. Um and then so I had to deal with that, and that went on for like maybe like 2, 3 years, and it wasn't good. Um I mean, if you're good, it might be good, but but also you gotta think about in prison, it's not so much about if you're good all the time. It's a lot of nonsense, a lot of negative stuff going on in prison. So it's not so much always about just being good. Um, so I had created like a debt. I had created problems with the gangs that I was affiliated. Um, yeah, I mean, so I don't know how much you want to go into that. I mean, just I don't know, but
Hmm. But maybe suffice it to say that, yeah, coming out of there, um, like it sounds like your lifestyle still wasn't something that you would have wanted
yeah,
for yourself ultimately.
it wasn't, and I became somebody that I wasn't happy with. Um, and like I was just living this life that was not. you know, who I was or who I just didn't even understand how it happened. Um, and so I also became kind of like a social outcast, which I didn't mind to a degree. Because when I was younger, I never wanted to be the person who was like a part of the in crowd per se. So I didn't mind that part when I had become like this social outcast, because of the way I was living, right? Like it's understandable to a degree, but so like when I hit like that rock bottom, which was what it was for me, um, I kind of had to make so I had to make a decision about like dang, who I wanted to be and the path I wanted to take, and what I also felt that I still had was that that glimmer of hope about the injustice in my case, and I knew I had to kind of change my behavior and who I was if I ever wanted to, utilize or capitalize off of that. And so, I kind of basically made a decision to like walk away from all the negative stuff that I was involved in, the gangs, the gambling, um, and and then that's where I got involved in. Like we talked about the shift. So that this was the first shift for me, and they had to do me personally, and I got involved in what I call programming. So I had never really like even looked into programming, but they also have the aspect of volunteer programming in prison, which is mostly religious programming. But luckily for me, at this time, they also had like uh, these other programs that deal with theater and writing, creative writing and dance and things like that. And so when I did make that choice and I did leave all the negative stuff alone and I got involved in the programming, originally I got involved with a theater production, a theater class called Action and Change Theater by a professor, Julie Rada. And then I was going to court, so I was going back and forth. But we put on a play, and that was my first time, like, learning about playwriting and studying characters, and so I got involved in that. And then the next big program that I got involved with was the University of Denver Prison Arts Initiative, led by Dr. Ashley Hamilton. Um, and that program was really life changing for me. And it's also the reason why I'm here today, because, and I'll tell you why. Um, Number one, the effect it had on me, right? So I had become, because of my like panic attacks and all that stuff, like I had social anxiety, like you wouldn't believe. Um, I'll give you a quick little example. It wasn't so much about fear or physical fear, but it was a fear of, but it's like, so I was going to church. This is my example, like the state. And so during church, and I had a buddy of mine that knew what I was experiencing, so he was with me, like he's going through this with me. Um, and they're asking individuals to like raise their hand and kind of read scripture. So I raised my hand, and then they call on me, and I'm reading maybe 3 lines of scripture, and which was maybe like 10 seconds. And in that 10 seconds, when I started to sit down, I was sweating profusely, like I had ran a marathon. But so that dealt with the social anxiety and stuff like that. But me and my buddy laughed about it. Like we laughed hard about it. It was good that we could laugh about it, but that's the challenge that I was facing. And so for me, I knew I was dealing with, so I knew I had to kind of like put myself in these challenging situations to try to face it and overcome it. And theater really gave me like that opportunity. And so I got involved in theater in a couple of plays, one for the Cuckoo's Nest, and we actually ended up doing that play and actually taking that play on tour. And so the second part of the shift that I'm kind of talking about was more so not so much to do with me personally, but about the environment in prison. And so we had the executive director that Governor Jared Polis had put in place was Dean Williams, who had come from Alaska. And he had a theater background too, but his mindset was the shift was about changing how we do corrections, right? Because we have been doing this for decades and we wasn't producing a positive outcome. And so the shift was more about going away from punitive and going to more like a restorative approach and a rehabilitative approach. Um, so he was very supportive in a lot of things involving programming, educational programming, artistic programming, and stuff like that. And so that's when, like I said, DUPI took off. He actually allowed us to take One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest on tour. It was the first time a prison um, ensemble took a play on tour to other facilities, right? Um, and and that was for us. He actually allowed the women's to actually take their play to the University of Denver, something that had never been done before, too. But the plays led to me getting involved with the group leadership, but it led to me getting involved with a podcast that we launched, like the first um, male and incarcerated female co-host on a podcast, which I was associate producer on. The podcast was called Within, and then it also led to us, other individuals, because DUPI had got so large. We started a radio station and things like that. But so for me, that shift was about, well, the first shift was really about me like changing my mindset and who I wanted to be, who I wanted to become, but also like having like a shift in the paradigm of like I can still like have a positive impact on my environment. And so like and who I wanted to be and who I wanted to become. So that was like the first shift. The second shift was like when when Dean Williams and all these programmers came in involved, that really deals with individuals who have experienced like trauma, and how to cope and how to rediscover yourself and how to be sociable, and and kind of like deal with you know certain things that you might be going through. And that's the interesting thing about theater, is like, and studying different characters and learning a particular character, and like why they are the way they are, and why they move the way they move, and how they make the decisions that they make. What is the root or the history and the background between that? And so um yeah, that's what theater did for me. Really opened up a lot of doors. And like I say, also all of the things that I was involved with, it really allowed the people in the community to kind of get to know me, right? And so you had the interesting thing is, like, whenever you hear about people in prison, you have what they'll tell you about them on paper, right? Which is their case or their prison record, right? And most of the times, those things aren't. It's not going to be good, right? Like, and it might be fearful, right? Like, it might, those things you might say, that individual should not be in the community, right? But then also you have, if you can get to know somebody, dig a little bit deeper, and kind of figure out like who they are, right? Uh, like, that's what that platform it did for me. Um, so people really got to know like my true self, who I am. But also that I'm not, I'm not a danger to society, because that's what, the paperwork said. I had a 98-year sentence, and I used to always tell people I am only dangerous because I have a 98-year sentence. That's why I'm dangerous. If you remove the 98-year sentence, I can be in society today. But um, but yeah, so that's what that programming like that, and that's what it did for me. It helped me with my social anxiety. It helped me kind of get back to my old self, become more sociable again. And don't get me wrong, I still deal with a little bit of nervousness at times, but I'm definitely, a lot better now. So
So I want to give, I'm looking at the time and I want to give folks a chance to ask questions, but first I wanted to ask one last thing. You talked about restorative practices and kind of a different model of the justice system. Can you talk a little bit about your process of kind of taking accountability for your own crime and kind of how that played out with restorative practices? I
Yeah,
know I'm skipping ahead. I'm
no, no,
skipping
no.
around a little bit.
Yeah, and so for me, when you think about, okay, acknowledging number one that you did something wrong. Um, Number two, what can you do to become a better person, to not make those decisions again, which is not to feel it's okay to make those decisions again, but also to try to repair, the harm that you cause in whatever capacity that you can. And so for me, because, like I said, my co-defendant's case, my case, the notoriety of it, I actually ended up, when I filed for clemency, they reached out to the victim of my case, at least one of them, Jason Casper, and asked him his, opinion for my clemency. And he wanted to, he said before he, would make a decision like that, he wanted to get to know me. He wanted to reach out and get to know me. Now, the fortunate thing for me was that, he had already had what they call a victim offenders dialogue with my co-defendant, and sat down with him and would, search for whatever he was searching for, whatever. And they had reconciliation. Um, and so I think that kind of set the stage for us in our meeting. And so he reached out to me, and Monica Chambers, who was leading the victim offender dialogue at the time, reached out to me. Um, and it's a process; it just doesn't happen right away. But over like 3 or 4 meetings, a meeting with the facilitators to see if I was ready, to see if he was ready, we actually met. Like I said, I took accountability. You know, apologized for my actions, and this is, I think, probably true for most people. When you're committing crimes, you're making those bad decisions. You're not thinking of the impact. You're not thinking of the impact on the individual, even if it's a crime where you think it's not directly on the individual person. Like if I steal your stuff, it still has an impact on you. If I break into your home and you're not there, it has an impact on what you feel, your domain, your safety. And so like understanding, how those decisions have a long lasting emotional impact on individuals. Getting to that place. And so like we talked about that, and we made a we we made I mean, I made amends for this things that I had done to him and the harm that I caused him. Um, and we actually met since then, and he's considers himself part of my family. He calls himself my brother. And we've done some restorative justice events and things like that. But yeah, so that was definitely a hard process for me, to get to that point, to want to do that when you get to a point of maturing and understand what you did was wrong and the harm you caused, you want to try to repair it as best as possible. And so yeah, that process did happen, and that kind of led to me also creating a program that I started, Pathway to Freedom. And so how I had talked about how these programs weren't available to individuals like me who had these long sentences, life sentences, like or de facto or virtual sentences, 98-year sentence. Um, so the program, and it was in collaboration with a team of guys. So I can't take full credit. Like it was just me, Marion Funches, and a couple other guys, and some of them, a lot of them who are still incarcerated. But the foundation of the program was really about restorative justice, mental health, education, community service, and then reentry. So we felt like we, through our experience and what we had learned and things like that, like we had the ability and the skills to start to share our experience slash teach, younger people as they came into the system, people who were in the system. And, that's what it functioned as, kind of like a support group, but also a group that in a program that addressed, like I said, a lot of those things, the lack of education programming, the lack of mental health services, and the acknowledgement of, you know, the wrong that we had done with the crimes that we had committed in the restorative justice process. So yeah, I think I don't know if I answered everything. Yeah, yeah.
All right. So I want, yeah, I'd love to ask you all sorts of questions, but I need to open it up to folks. So quick note, folks online, submit your questions through the chat. Folks here, yeah, just give it a hand raise. I'll come and give you the microphone. Yeah, folks could just hold off on asking their questions until I get to them with the microphone. That lets our online audience hear the questions.
Thank you. When you were in the hole and in solitary, you said they gave you a book of, or they had different books like anger management and things like that. Did they give you any sort of mental health counseling or help in that sense?
Well, they did offer you like, I mean, a mental health counselor or something would come by and ask you like how you were doing, and um, if you told them you needed help, they would also provide you with other material that was, I guess, to help you cope with the things you were going through. The sad thing that I see is just like a default response is a lot of times they just give people meds, and I understand for some guys it's kind of helpful because it helps you escape the reality that you're in at the time, but it also becomes you become dependent on those things, and it's also mood.
It's not actually fixing the problem. It's more like just
Yeah,
it down.
putting a band-aid on it, but it's also mood altering, and it's also can have negative effects too. I think it could make some individuals, worse. And so they did have that. Um, and just me being honest, I thought about reaching out to them at one point and even seeking out some of that, but then I decided against it after more thought, but so to a degree, yeah, they had those mental services, and they would try to bring you some kind of materials, or have them come and check it. I think it was like once a week or something like that. But yeah, they try to a degree.
All right. I think we have a question from our online audience.
Thank you, Michael. This question is from Kathleen online. It's got several parts, so let's try to think about them one at a time. Let's see. You say you purposely did not commit violent crimes or hurt someone, and these two burglaries are what brought you down. So how did these two robberies become so serious? One. I'm curious how the prosecution or the police charged you. So you robbed two video stores separately, and there was one clerk at one store and two clerks at two stores. First, why was there only one count of crime of violence when there were two robberies? And second, why is that considered kidnapping? You got three counts of kidnapping, but it doesn't sound like you took them out of the store.
Okay, so yeah, it's a lot, but let me try I'm gonna unpack it, but you can maybe help me a little bit if I need help with the rest of the questioning. But it's very complicated, and it goes into how bizarre, crazy our judicial system is. So first of all, yes, when you talk about my mindset, as a young man, and the crimes that I was committing, I never wanted to harm anybody. And like I said, I didn't carry a gun when I was younger. However, for these crimes, because we wanted it to go smooth, I had an understanding of like Blockbuster video stores because I worked at one. So I felt like, it was safe. But we did take a rifle. We had a rifle, and it was unloaded, and the victims did not know that. But like, so that was our mindset. Okay, we got the weapon, so they'll follow us and just do what we say, but we're not gonna shoot anybody or nothing like that. So that was the mindset. Because I just never been like a violent person, never wanted to hurt people. As far as the case, yes, I was just as I couldn't believe it either, right? So they took two robberies and they turned those two robberies because we were taking something of value, um, not just from the store, but from every individual that was in the store. And this is how the law works now, still to this day. Like if somebody came in here and robbed this event that we're at right now, which has like, however many people, that person could be charged with each and every person that's here with a count of robbery. So that's how I ended up being charged with those two stores, being charged with three aggravated robberies. The kidnapping came about because at that time, kidnapping, the elements, what met the elements of that charge was that the individuals in the store was moved from the front of the store to the back of the store to the back office. And because of that, the risk of their endangerment was heightened. And so that met the element of kidnapping. Um, and so that's how kidnapping came about. And the thing with crime of violence is, so aggravated robbery is, and crimes like that, they're per se crimes of violence, meaning that they're already violent crimes in and of themselves. However, in order for you to make a sentence or charges to carry mandatory sentencing, you have to be charged with crime of violence. And you don't have to be charged with a crime of violence for each and every count. You just have to be charged with one crime of violence. Okay, so that's how all that came about. And the thing about it was, there was a point in our case where the district attorney, right, which is, a lot of times people think it's all about the judge making this decision. And the judge literally commented at our sentencing that he was uncomfortable with the sentence, but he had no choice, because a lot of people don't understand the power that district attorney and prosecutors have. They dictate the path of your case from start to finish, and pretty much the outcome, right? And so when we were originally arrested, we weren't charged with the crime of violence. And so at that point, even if went to trial and got found guilty, the judge still had discretion to sentence us to concurrent or consecutive sentences. About 2 months into the case, um, for whatever reason, I still don't know to this day, they decided to charge us with the crime of violence. Um, and there was nothing that we can do about it, nothing that my lawyers can do about it. Once they put that charge on there, it was a part of the case, just as if it, that was an element of me committing that crime that day. Um, and so once that was a part of the case, I could either take the plea bargain, which was 75 years, or go to trial and either get found not guilty and walk home free, or be found guilty and either face the 98-year sentence. And so that was what unfolded, and that's how that came about, which is very complicated. But like I say, the prosecution, they knew exactly what they were doing, which I try to advocate, and I try to you know try to fight for it. I understand we need to hold people accountable for their actions, but I try to fight for it. Justice, and 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 basically fairness, right? Like, um, so these prosecutors, um, that seek these type of sentences, seek these type of they know exactly what they're doing, because if it wasn't for that clerical error that happened with my co-defendant's case, I probably wouldn't be sitting here. That's just a fact. Like I said, there's a lot of individuals that still sitting in prison because their charges, they were aggressively prosecuted. And so what happened in my case was, um, the path that I had went on was a predictable path when you send somebody who's 19 to a 98-year sentence. So how I look at it is, the prosecution understood exactly what they were doing. Like, they were trying to lock myself and my co-defendant up for life, and they were trying to throw away the key. And because of that clerical error, they provided my co-defendant with opportunity, you know, to demonstrate who he can be or who he was, and for him to be paroled, which was also a big clear. I mean, like that was a big mistake on the part of the state for them not to catch that, right? Which they also talked about in his case later on. But fortunate for him and I, uh, that did happen. He was released. He went into the community. He did what he was supposed to do. He completed parole. And then so for me, it opened the door for me. Even though I lost my legal argument, um, but I also had to demonstrate, I had to demonstrate that I was a changed person as well too. It took a lot of work, especially because of the trouble I had got in Ridge. I had to overcome not just the crime itself, right, but I also had to overcome the bad decisions I made in prison in my earlier years. So I hope I answered that for.
Thank you very much for speaking. It was a wonderful presentation, and I'm really impressed by you. I don't want to get bogged down in, but I heard Lyman, I think I heard Canyon City, and then Denver. So were you in 3 different?
Yeah, so Denver, DRDC, that's where you go. Denver Reception and Diagnosis Center. Denver Reception and Diagnosis Center. That's where you go right after you receive your sentence for them to do an assessment. And then after that, they decide to send you to whatever prison is aligned with your custody level. So yes, I went to from there. I went to Lyman, then I went to CSP. From CSP to Centennial. Kansas City, you mentioned, is a prison complex. They have a prison complex in Kansas City, which has about 13 prisons in it. So I went to CSP, Colorado State Penitentiary, Centennial, and then from there I went to Sterling in 2010, and I was at Sterling from 2010 to 2013.
And so did things
I mean,
get,
excuse me, sorry, to 2023.
so did things get better at Canyon City, or was that where the warden said, hey, you don't need to be in solitary confinement, you need to be back in population?
Well, that was where the warden definitely gave me an opportunity and looked at my case and said, okay, he's been in solitary confinement enough. So she felt that I had, served enough solitary confinement time, and I should be afforded at least the opportunity to work my way back into general population. And so that's when that happened. Um, Down the road, it still took about 3 years for me to kind of snap out of whatever crazy mess and mindset that I was in before I started my actual self improvement and change and started doing those things.
I don't have a microphone, but is your mom still with us?
Yes, she is, and I think she's watching. She was trying to get the link, but she is. That was the most beautiful thing in the world for me. Because a lot of guys when they go away for that long, they don't have that, right? That pretty much all my family, so my dad, my mom, my sister, my brother, they were all still alive. They're still all alive. So for them to be able to witness me walking out of the doors was amazing. So
Thanks, Michael.
mhm.
Another from Kathleen online. Let's see, please. Part of sending people to jail is punishment, but part is hoping they will change their ways for the better. Did you see that shift happening with the prisoners a number of times, or was that very rare? It sounds like getting involved with plays was your first step. Did you see many or few benefiting from the wellness or skills programs?
I've seen a lot of guys. Um, some of them find the strength and whatever to like find it, and they do it kind of on their own. Um, and so I know a lot of guys, and I've seen a lot of guys who have made a change as far as who they are as people. Statistically, they say that individuals will grow out of criminal behavior and thinking in their late 30s, 40s, right? So when you're talking about guys that spend 20, 30 years in prison, I know a lot of these individuals who, you know, hope and praying for a second chance, second chance in life. And they could, anything to be able to try to demonstrate that they're capable of being productive, constructive individuals and citizens. And so, but for what I witnessed with the programming, it was really impactful for multiple reasons. Just individuals, well-being mentally and emotionally, but also it the work that we did with the plays and the podcasts, and what I witnessed was these type of projects and these type of events that brought together like groups, and normally segregated groups that don't associate, right? Um, really, like in prison, like they might not associate unless it's like about business or it's about a conflict. Um, but with the theater productions and, like I said, with the podcast and the radio station and things like that, those walls and kind of like barriers seem to kind of come down. And I think it was about just being a part of something positive, having that opportunity. Um, so I seem to have a large and major impact on individuals, and a lot of the individuals I seem to have an impact on. Most of them are doing life and are never coming home, and they've kind of like accepted that, but I still seem to have a positive impact on them in multiple ways, like just them having something, like I say, positive, constructive to do, but also these events. Um, these events gave a lot of individuals like that. It gave them opportunities to spend time with their families, because a lot of the family members were able to come to these events, and like kind of witness, their family members partake in these things, and so just those moments and opportunities alone were like priceless and very, like, I think, transformative. So
I want to thank you for coming tonight. Your story has really impacted me. One of the things that you said that sticks in my mind is you said for some people, you go to high school, you go to college. But for you, it was you go to high school and then you start committing these crimes. Am I understanding that right?
yeah, the terminology they use is kind of like the pipeline to prison. So like you start getting in trouble like in middle school or high school, and then because of the trouble you get in there, you to prison.
So my question is a little bit after you said that, you said when you received your sentence, there was this crushing hopelessness. Did you experience that hopelessness as you were growing up and you were making these choices? Or were you making these choices because that's all you need to do?
so I wasn't making these choices not because I was kind of hopeless at that young age, but I was young and impulsive, and also not understanding the impact of my decisions, but also not understanding the impact of your decisions and the impact they have on the individual, but also not understanding the reality of our society and the judicial system, right? Like I said, I was committing crimes, but I never thought the crimes I committed could lead me to basically a life sentence. Um, and so at that young age, like I know I'm doing something that's wrong, right? When I'm committing crimes, but I'm also in my mind I'm taking risks, and I'm taking risks that I'm okay with, um, because I feel like um, there. I guess it's I'm trying to like help you guys understand it. Like you're taking these risks, and at some point you might get caught and you might suffer consequences, but part of, like I say, our society where you're growing up in is that that's just a part of your path. You're gonna go to jail, but the thing was, I never wanted to go to prison for life, right? And I never wanted to go to even prison for a long time, you know. And so that was what was the like crushing thing for me when I received my 98-year sentence. That was like that's where that came from because I'm like, okay, I like, you know, when you think about like certain crimes or you think about certain situations, you like, okay, you could try to make a justifiable or rational argument of a life sentence, right? But in my situation, it wasn't even fathomable. It's like it just didn't make sense. So that's what was, you know, heartbreaking, frustrating, um, and what was hard for me to deal with at that, especially at that age, you know.
Thank you.
I have a follow-up to that. So how do you teach your kids or grandkids that that doesn't have to be their path or their pipeline?
So what I do and try to talk to about with the youth about is that, you know, first of all, the world and society that we live in, you can look at certain situations, you can say things are unfair, you can say that, you know, you can have all these things. But for me, I like to tell individuals, while those things may be true, you have to utilize those things to benefit you. Okay, how can I, knowing these things, how can I position myself? How can I come up with a plan? How can I make certain connections and interact with certain people or certain communities or certain groups to where I can learn, grow, better myself, and come up with the plan and the path to reach whatever goal it is that I want. When we were committing crimes, we wanted money, right? We wanted money, and that was just how we knew how to get it quick, fast, and what we felt was like where we weren't hurting somebody. Um, and so when you talk about a lot of crimes, when you think about it, a lot of them are economic, right? Like a lot of people are making decisions, whether it's because they have means of wanting something that they maybe should want, a Lamborghini, right? Something that's just, or it might be something to pay the bills. It might be something that's out of desperation, that's a serious need. Um, if I would tell people, yes, there's a lot of bad in the world, there's a lot of unfairness, but there's also a lot of good in the world. There's a lot of good people. There's a lot of good opportunities. There's a lot of opportunities if you just seek it out. And and also you have to try to have that patience. You know, you have to try to understand that you just can't have everything quick right away. And you know, I think part of that, you know, some kids learn that, you know, in certain aspects, whether you're talking about maybe in certain sports or in certain educational program or certain skills you might learn, that delayed gratification, right? That process about having that plan and that process and working towards something or saving for something. Um, I had a person that was in like a social system when I was young, and she kind of asked me like, why do you do the things you do? Like, why do you make the decisions you make? And at that time, I explained to her, I said, listen, like I have a criminal mindset, right? I, like a person like me, I walk by a store and I see something in the store and I want it. And you, who are a normal citizen, you walk by a store and you see something you want, and we both start to think about how we're going to get that thing, but we just think about it in different ways. I start to plan on figuring out, okay, how I'm going to break into this store to get what I want. I don't want to shoplift in this store to get what I want. Like you start to think about, okay, this thing costs this much. So how much is it going to take for me to save up for this or to whatever, put it on a credit card or whatever, right? But so that was my mindset back then. But it's not so much a criminal element. I mean, you know, we all make, you know, certain bad decisions when we're younger, or we might just have different perspective, but it's about, you know, being like learning and being taught these things, right? And so I think that's part of our what's lacking in our educational system. Um, real world um, situations, like real world realities, I feel like needs to be taught in our schools, about finances, about like planning on how to live. How would you pay the bills? How would you pay your bills? How would you plan for saving for a trip? Um, how would you plan to take care of a family and the expenses of taking care of a family? Like that needs to be. I feel like that needs to be a part of our programming or a part of our educational system. Things that we provide to youth, and you know, right now Colorado has a budget, a DOC budget of like $1 billion, right? And so that's the other thing about the prison, the pipeline of prison, is I think at this point it's a choice of what kind of money and resources are we putting to what, right? Like um when you talk about, if you ever want to understand somebody's like values, all you have to really do is look at like where do they put their money? What do they put their money towards, right? What do they put their invest their money in, right? And that could tell you about who they are as a person and what their values are. So I feel like that's the same thing for us as a society. You know, it's on a larger scale about what do we want to put our dollars into? Do we want to put our dollars into prisons and policing, which policing is a beautiful thing. You know, don't get me wrong, policing is a beautiful thing, but I think there's an element of um, reactive and being like proactive. Like so, um, we can put more resources and dollars to a lot of communities that are lacking certain things, certain services that I feel like all kids, you know, all kids should have an opportunity. So like I'm a big advocate, big fan, big supporter of equal opportunity. You know, I know the world's not fair, but you know, if we could you just provide equal opportunity and allow individual to grow and kind of be to grow into that who they are. You know what I mean? If they had access and opportunity. So, uh, yeah.
We're going to take one more question from the online side.
Gianna says, thank you so much for sharing your story. What do you hope people who are incarcerated will take away from your experience?
For me, so I work with Remerg, we're a reentry program. We help people coming out, but also I go back to prisons when I can. And so for me, like my thing that I hope individuals take away from my story is to not give up on themselves and their situations. The reality, which is understandable, like, oh, you think about, okay, 2010, so like 13, 14 years ago, I was in solitary confinement and I couldn't get moved 5 feet without being in handcuffs and shackles on my feet, right? And I had made all these bad decisions. Um, but wherever you're at in life, you have the ability to take control of your life and turn it around. So I hope that's what individuals can take from like my story, is, you know, overcoming, you know, overcoming you're just overcoming all of it, man. You know, just the craziness, because it was a lot of craziness. But you're talking about the unjust in the judicial system, where you're talking about the bad decisions I made and getting involved in all the negative stuff and the violent act that I committed, and finding myself in solitary confinement and the effect I had on me or whatever. And how I came out, you know, with social anxiety and all that. But like we had the ability to take charge of our life and make a change. And so the hardest part about that is like it won't be like whatever it is you might be seeking. It won't be immediate. It's going to be a process. And you're probably definitely going to have, they got 5 stages of change, right? You're going to have setbacks. You might stumble along that journey. Um, but if you're serious about it, and you really work hard for it, you can work towards achieving something. Now, I understand that my situation was very unique and unusual, and so everybody else's paths obviously would be different, but so those individuals facing like a very bleak future with those lengthy sentences, I know how it is. It can be very hopeless. But I hope they can just look, like I say, look at mine and be like, man, if he can do it, however it happened, I can at least work towards mine and try to achieve whatever it is I'm working towards.
All right. Well, that fortunately we're out of time, and that Michael, I just want to thank you for your generosity and being with us and sharing with us tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
I want to thank all of you for coming and bringing your questions. I want to give a shout out to Michael's family. Thanks for being here with us online. I want to also thank the Estes Valley Library Friends and Foundation for supporting One Book, One Valley and everything that we do. We have a number of great programs coming up this month. On Thursday, we've got Eric Stensland talking about how and why he chooses to be in solitude and what we can learn from him. You can find the rest of our programming at estisvalleylibrary.org/1B1V. We also have some cool bookmarks and programs at the desk while they last. Yeah, so thank you all for being with us this evening. For those of us who are here in person, drive safe and have a good night.
Yeah.